Hello, I'm Shelley Wilson, and as my panel is assembling, I'll just apologize up front if I have waved at you excitedly, even though we don't know each other. It's because I'm a member of the aging workforce and I can't see any longer. So very sorry. I'd love to meet you if I've waved at you and haven't met you yet. So good. It looks like we have everybody. Again, I'm Shelley Wilson with Longenecker and Associates. I have a question for you. And the question is, in your mind, what are the big issues that EM is facing right now? And so as that's fleeting across your mind, I'm wondering, did you think of regulatory? Anything regulatory? So we know that the regulatory process can greatly speed things up in the cleanup mission, or it can really slow things down in the cleanup mission. So I spent 28 years as a former regulator in the state of South Carolina, and I have to admit it's my keen passion to see cleanup progress that is fueled by strong regulatory relationships. And I'm just so excited to have this panel here today to bring you the wealth of their expertise in terms of regulatory relationships. So we know the cleanup process is a little bit unique, right? DOE can't do it on its own. It's a collaborative process, right? To be able to clean up, you need mutual agreement from DOE, from the contractors. Many times, it's usually the state and EPA regulators together. So it's usually four parties that all have to say yes, all have to be in agreement to fuel the cleanup process. And we know that any one of those parties can slow things down, right, if they're not in agreement. And so the key thing is that cleanup is fueled, is powered by mutual agreement, and getting that alignment is crucial. So I think all of you know in this room that a short-term win at all costs, it might be the win that day, but it's going to cost you later. And again, preaching to the choir, I think we all know that cleanup is about the long game, which means that it takes good relationships to keep that sustained. And I'll admit, sometimes disputes are necessary, maybe once in a blue moon, but we see that continued recurring disputes hurts the cleanup process and really degrades the regulatory relationships as well as community trust. So again, I'll ask you this question. Have you seen brilliant people in a room, in a group, that can't come to consensus? And I think we've all seen that happen. But that is indicative of the cleanup process, right? It really doesn't matter how smart any of the people are, because we have brilliant people that work on cleanup. And the thing is, we see progress when that group has good interpersonal skills, and when that group energy is harnessed and aligned in the right direction. And without those two things, the interpersonal skills and the harnessing of the group energy, then what we see is the cleanup process goes nowhere fast. So the studies show, and this is very interesting, I think, that the information that we share is almost secondary to the process. It's good information, but the success of the group is really based on positive group dynamics. And those group dynamics are crucial in getting to that mutual agreement and to that cleanup progress that we want. So we can ignore those group dynamics, but if we do so, it's going to take a lot longer, if ever, to reach good regulatory decisions. So I've actually been called by some of the people I work with, I've been called a marriage counselor. Because trying to gain mutual alignment and direction from DOE, contractors, EPA, and the state all at the same time. More accurately, I've been called a polygamist marriage counselor because it's all those parties wrapped in together. So it is an interesting challenge to harness all those group dynamics in a very positive and aligned way. So I've really been honored to work with all of the sites on this panel. And I just want to really recognize the leadership that you see here, the tremendous leadership, because they have all recognized the value of that relationship building. Not just the status quo, but actually building and investing in up-leveling those regulatory relationships. And also the realization that having a strong, ready, and formal relationship process, and I'm not talking about just one or two star players that have great personalities, right? But having a strong, steady relationship system and process, it's really critical when you need it, when you need that regulatory decision on time. And so we have some examples today of how that strong investment in relationship building is paying off. So we have Wyatt Clark, and to my left, Wyatt is here, of course, at Savannah River site. You've probably heard of the core team over and over 20 years of that partnering relationship building process. And so I'll mention I was on the regulator side back in 2005 when DOE and the state actually developed common goals and values for liquid waste. And again, a lot of trust over those 20 years, a lot of really hard relationship building work. I just wanted to mention that as Wyatt is looking at regulatory milestones and setting new ones for liquid waste, we actually modernized those goals and values with DOE, EPA, and the state, and Wyatt, of course, in one meeting. And that only comes because you have that relationship and that past history of trust. So we have Laura Wilkerson as well, the acting manager for Oak Ridge. And as Laura mentioned earlier, Laura has invested heavily in an Oak Ridge regulatory partnership framework, and that has allowed just tremendous progress that is enabling a decision on the on-site CERCLA cell that's going to enable future cleanup mission. So we have Kim Leeback with LANL and N3B, and so Kim has recently invested in the regulatory relationships. It is a little more recent, the past 5 or 6 months, so it's still very new, but certainly we appreciate the hard work that it's taking and will continue to take, but appreciate that initiation of the investment. So Connie is here representing the Regulatory Center for Excellence, and I'll just say that Connie has always been a strong advocate of the value of relationship investment and building, and has always been a contributor to that at Savannah River site. We have Amy Fitzgerald with us from the city of Oak Ridge. Amy's going to weave in for us the strong voice the community has in making cleanup decisions as well. And then we have Kristen Ellis with us as well from DOE headquarters. Kristen's going to share some with us on the overall vision and plans for EM alignment, especially in terms of regulatory relationships. So thank you all for being on the panel. And starting off with a question for Kirsten. So here's your question. What is the overall strategy of EM to maximize the regulatory relationships for cleanup progress? And what can we take from Oak Ridge's and Savannah River site's success? What can we take from that to other sites?
Thank you, Shelley. Great to be here and great to see the crowd here. So thank you I'm looking forward to this conversation very much. And I'd love Laura to pipe in when I'm done answering because she, of course, is living the Oak Ridge dream, and we're all looking forward to the final paperwork being finished for the EMDF ROD. Congressman Fleischman mentioned that as well, and that's a recent success that we're really proud of. And I think a lot of the things that you mentioned in your intro were important to how we approached that relationship in Oak Ridge, but also in other sites as well. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that the interpersonal relationships are key to establishing trust and moving forward. But in speaking to the succession challenges that we've heard so much about today, I assume that the state agencies and the other regulatory partners are having similar kind of succession changes and challenges as well. So these relationships that we've been fortunate to have in place for multiple decades, that's not going to be the case for the remainder of the cleanup program because no one can stay in the program for that long. So I think also with COVID, we've had an opportunity to do a reset on every way that we're doing business. And it has created some opportunities to kind of take a step back. And how have we been doing this? And we have to adjust it somehow. And because everything's changed, it means that you can start over. And I think what's been encouraging to see is the environment post-COVID and the cooperation that still exists, even though we've had all of these changes that I laid out there. And I'm encouraged also by your introductory comments about how we can hold up the Savannah River relationship as, multiple decades of strong partnership, but, still having new relationships in place in some place like New Mexico. Just one more point on that kind of succession planning model. If you take a look at the complex, you see that our field managers, they've had a fair amount of turnover there as well. Laura's new in the role as acting because the former manager is now my boss as acting EM4. And Michael Michelinas, who had several years at Savannah River, is now in New Mexico. So I think that's also a great synergy because you have Michael coming from the Savannah River experience and then, being able to take that to Los Alamos and kind of build from there. So. Like I said, I'd like to give Laura the opportunity if she would like to highlight some of the great success at Oak Ridge with the EMDF project, but we'll have plenty more chance to talk.
Yes.
Go ahead, Laura.
Thank you, Kristen. Laura?
So I don't want to get ahead of the questions here, but as I explained in my previous panel and the discussion we had there, we have seen a lot of momentum being created by the establishment of this new regulatory framework and resetting the relationship there. And we not only have seen that success with the disposal sale and being so close to getting to a decision, but also with other decisions that have been made recently where we have seen that those have been quicker than we would have typically have expected in the past before the relationship was reset. And I agree with Kristen that it's a challenge that we have an aging workforce and it takes time to build those relationships and to get to a point where the trust is built and people can collaborate and work towards the same end goal. But I think it's important to ingrain in the culture of the organization that partnering and collaborative approach to make sure that the people that come after us at least have an initiation in that type of environment and can build on it. And that comes with leadership, leadership setting the example, making sure that they communicate the expectation that is a necessity to have strong relationships with the regulators and to work together. And hopefully that can be passed on as we get new people in that are going to take over. So.
Thank you, Laura. Exactly. It's a strong seal of leadership to carry on that collaboration when new people come into the regulatory team. And it's also part of the system that gets built So when new people come in, whether it be from the state, EPA, DOE, into that established system, then they're oriented, in a sense, to how the team works, the ground rules, the decision-making processes, to be able to build that longevity into the process. So Connie, the next question is for you. And so Connie's with the Savannah River National Laboratory, but also standing up the Regulatory Center for Excellence. Connie, what is the vision for the Regulatory Center for Excellence, and how will that Excellence Center help EM with the overall regulatory strategy and vision?
Thank you, Shelley. Good afternoon, everybody. So you're going to hear a lot of probably the same themes you've heard most of the morning, so that's good that we're consistent with what we keep hearing from our leadership. About 2 years ago when we were looking at the vision, you heard, the SRNL just became an independent contract. It was interesting having those discussions with our new Battelle leadership as well as some of the partners of, well, what does SRNL bring to the table, and what is so unique about SRNL, and them trying to understand what we do. And the one great thing I think we've done there is that whole closing the fuel cycle. We were involved from the making the materials. We made the weapons. We've now closed the cycle. We're continuing to make progress on that. The other thing that I think was very important was the whole core team approach and how well we work with our regulators. And I know Amy Boyette from DOE. She complains a little occasionally that not enough people attend her public meetings, and I try to remind her that's a good thing, right? If people aren't there complaining and people aren't asking a lot of questions, maybe there's some trust there, and so you're doing a great job. So as we continue those discussions, everybody said, well, what's next then? Okay, so where does SRNL take this from here, or what can we do? Well, with our partners, with Longenecker and then our universities, we said, well, how do we take this one step further? How do we take this to the complex? How do we take what we know and have that engaged with everybody else? Well, from a technical standpoint, that's what the lab does really well. As engineers, scientists, sometimes we think we're conveying a message really well, but sometimes we speak some languages that people really don't understand, right? Or we don't necessarily address those concerns. I think the one thing that SRNL and our close partnership with our contractor on site is we try to make sure when we're solving a problem, we're asking those questions. Well, you're asking me to solve one question, but what's your real problem? What are you trying to get to on that endpoint? So being that probing to understand the details, right, of what does the technology really need to do? So if I say, hey, I'm trying to solve a technetium problem, well, where does it start? Okay, so we can bring that to the table as SRNL. But our Longenecker partners, especially the regulator aspect of it, have a long history of that, Shelley being one of them. David Wilson is our partner in this charter. They have an experience that's a little different than the lab, right? They see it as a regulator. They see it as a person living in the community. And what do you need to do to get some assurance for that community? And then finally, our university partners. We're actually very lucky that two of our partners have a strong public policy departments, as well as communication emphasis. And I think, we all have to take a step back occasionally and think about that communication. Sometimes people get things better in electronics. Sometimes they're readers. Sometimes they don't have access to either one of those things. So our policy folks, our communications folks in University of Georgia, Professor Conrad, they bring that approach to it. So trying to have that triangle, right, of you've got to have the technical piece, you've got to have the regulators on board, you've got to have the community involved. So that's what we saw as a vision of how can we take that and how do we bring that forward. How we incorporate that in the mission, I think is the interesting part, because I don't think, we're not trying to say we're replacing what somebody does at their site. We're there to facilitate that. We know politics are local. We know concerns are local, right? So I can't take my concerns for Savannah River site and put them at another lab or put them at another site. So you have to get those stakeholders involved. But I think what we can bring to the table is what's that toolbox where lessons learned have worked. What's worked at one site. Maybe they're not going to work at every site, but if we work together and we try those different approaches, hopefully we get to a better endpoint. I think the other piece is we bring the whole lab network with us when we need it. DOE has contracts with others in EM space. CRESP brings some other regulatory aspects to the table for us, some other technologies. So with our role as EM's lab, we can help facilitate that. And I think you heard Sam this morning from an NE perspective, that whole consent-based siting, right? How do we help facilitate that? And finally, I would be remiss if I didn't say, from Carmelo's perspective, from Legacy Management, they do a great job of that because they have the turnover, right? They need to be, what does the community want for that site at the end of it? So bringing that aspect in as well. And I think we can all learn from that, and that's what we are trying to do with that mission moving forward. So.
Thank you, Connie, and we look forward to a bright future with the Regulatory Center for Excellence. So my next question is where the rubber hits the road a little more. I'm going to go first to Wyatt, and then to Kim, and then back to Laura if there's anything to add. So one of the benefits of a strong regulatory relationship is the speed and ease of decisions. You might think that's contradictory, right? Regulatory, speed, and ease, but it can go together. So can you give me an example of this in recent history? So Wyatt?
Okay, you're absolutely right. I wouldn't have put speed, ease, and regulatory in the same sentence, but reflecting on it, you sort of started laying the foundation as you kicked this session off. We really do benefit from a mature core team, a team that's worked on relationships, a team that's gone out and really solved problems. So right off the bat, we don't have to buy on credit, one of the difficult aspects of life, right? Being a new organization, Savannah River Mission Completion, we recognize that one of the first initiatives we had to get started on was, after establishing our 10-year strategy, reworking the FFA and the dispute resolution agreement. Those are pretty big issues, and we had to do that in parallel with coming up with an acceptable way to ramp up the facilities. We now own all the operations to be able to disposition the 34 million gallons of high-level waste. And we needed to do it in a way that made sense to all the parties. A facilitated partnering session like you referenced, and thank you for helping in that. That's your paid-for political announcement. Was a key element. We did reach a very quick adjustment to our common goals and values, which we could build on. Being transparent, we were very forthright in the difficulties that we faced ramping up the plants, and our goal to drive a lot of curies initially, i.e. about 40% in the first couple of years, 3 years. We rolled all that together with a true partnering. Hey, I'm going to show you everything I've got. I'm going to show you all the risk. Work with me. And I would say that over the course of the summer, and that's pretty quick in my mind for regulatory work, we got down to the point where we're in the red zone. Now, I'm from the University of South Florida, and if you watched that University of Florida game last week, you'll know in the red zone you can lose the whole game, right? And so we're being very careful to watch the fumbling and to make sure that we're still working the sensitivities. But I think all that is built upon the core team and the fact we didn't have to start buying on credit.
Exactly. Well said. Thank you. Kim, what's your perspective?
Okay. I would say the regulatory relationship is a journey and not a destination. And we do have areas that I would categorize where we've seen more speed and ease than others. One example at N3B Los Alamos is in our aggregate area work. This is where at Los Alamos National Laboratory there's been material or waste deposited over the decades, and we go out and do potholing, sampling, excavating, comparing against the regulations, we run risk, et cetera, and we work that closely with the regulator. And we are able to get in pretty good agreement in our aggregate area work. The regulator's comfortable with that work, and we can get progress going on those jobs. And we've recently, to the point stated earlier, we've recently launched 3 more MSA support contractors to attack different areas on the laboratory site. So that would be one area where I would say things are going very well, just due to the teams we have in place and the comfort of the regulator with that type of work. We also felt the need in a different area, which is a chromium plume we are investigating. We weren't having the same level of success that we desired there, so we said, okay, we've heard Oak Ridge has had successes on their journey. Savannah River has had successes as well, so Long and Necker is one of our critical subs on our contract, and so Shelley has been helping us in our chromium area so we can hopefully get to more speed and ease in that area. But as one of the panels said earlier, and I'll reiterate it, first of all, you have to have the leadership commitment. And I see that from my counterpart, Michael Michelanis at DOE. He's committed to making the regulatory relationship better. Consistent communications, which Shelley has helped us get a little more organized and making sure those communications are consistent. And then the speed and ease of working through technical difficulties is often where the problems lie. And so kind of working through a differing professional opinion with the regulator, but Shelley has given us tools where we can work that with the regulator, and I think we are seeing some successes there. So those are just a few things to add, Shelley.
Thanks, Kim. And Laura, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I just want to add that, typically regulatory decisions and approvals are on the critical path of our cleanup projects. So every time that you delay a regulatory decision or approval, you increase the cost and the schedule of these projects. And we are dealing with facilities that are contaminated, that are 70 or more years old, continue to deteriorate, and that does not get better with time. So the whole goal of having strong regulatory relationships is to be able to have timely decisions so that we don't impact cleanup progress. And if all of us keep that in mind, it's just really important. We all want the reservations to be cleaned up. We all have the same goal, so keeping that in mind, I think, is healthy as we move forward.
Thank you, Laura. And I'll just emphasize that one of the teams that is part of the regulatory relationship framework that Laura mentioned earlier is the Emerging Issues team. And in working through some of the issues over the past 2.5, 3 years, the process is so collaborative that sometimes the most creative ideas, the best ideas are coming from EPA or the state of Tennessee. And it's just interesting when you start to see that kind of collaboration, actually, forward thinking with that creativity from the regulators that really help us get to a good regulatory decision. So the next question, we'll start with Kristen. So, and then see if Laura and Wyatt have anything to add. But with the strong regulatory relationships existing now between DOE, the relative states, and EPA Region 4, specifically at Savannah River and Oak Ridge in that Region 4, even up through the top management levels, do you see any issues that can leverage the strength and creativity of those relationships from like a regional perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of opportunities there. As part of the EMDF ROD process, I had the opportunity to work on a team with Region 4 EPA representatives, also EPA headquarters representatives, and we kind of dove in a little bit more about what stakeholder engagement should look like, and that's always an opportunity for continuous improvement. And, what does engagement look for citizens right now in 2022 in a post-COVID environment? And maybe things like postcards in a mailbox are not quite the same as reading something on Twitter or, Insta, or all the things that people are getting their news from that aren't a postcard in your mailbox. And so that was a great opportunity for us to kind of take a step back and look about how we are engaging and how are we engaging particular communities and, providing information in more than one language so people can find it a little bit more accessible. So that was a great creative exercise that we got to participate in last year. I also have kind of heard anecdotally some folks from EPA headquarters complaining about how much resources it is to review land transfer packages. And it's like, wow, what a great problem to have that we get to talk about land transfers and working on these things. And so, I would love to tackle the problem of how we make the land transfer process quicker, because that means the land transfers are happening quicker and, we can get to continue these conversations like I heard in the ECA board meeting about, a lot of conversation about the next steps and what is the future and what's in the realm of the possible. And so that's really energizing and I think another source of creativity for us. I know Oak Ridge is real proud of the recent NRD agreement that was reached with the state. And I think that's another potential novel approach that some of the other sites could be benefiting from. So, there's a lot of ways we can take this. We've already talked about the Regulatory Center of Excellence. I think that's another potential item. And, again, emphasizing that vehicle will allow us to tap into the lessons learned that Legacy Management has had, the lessons learned from the National Lab Network on environmental management and other legacy issues. And so I really think, the time is now. There's a lot of synergies and a lot of new approaches that give us a lot of different options.
Thank you, Kristen. Laura and Wyatt, do y'all have anything that you would like to add?
Just from the Oak Ridge perspective, I think that what we've put in place and this improved regulatory framework will be very useful as we navigate through the process of getting agreement on groundwater remedies for the East Tennessee Technology Park. We've been working with the regulators for a long time in trying to get agreement on that, and we are very optimistic that under the framework that we have established, we will be able to get through that process and come out hopefully with a sensible, implementable solution.
Exactly, thank you. And some of the groundwater plumes between Oak Ridge and Savannah Riverside are similar, so there could be lessons learned from one site to the other as well. Wyatt, anything?
Yeah, so the strong relationships, we're all really good at project management. And to that end, we focus a lot on risk. I see the regulatory side as where a lot of the opportunities land. And when you're looking at leveraging learning from other sites, it starts to open your eyes. Even the sessions we had this morning, I called it beneficial reuse. Excavating in one area to use in another is, well, quite candidly, it's very creative and it gives opportunities, right? So at the site, we have discussed the possible use of ash, moving it over into the salt disposal units as we go to close those. And that's addressing two issues beneficially. And that is the kind of leverage that we can gain by looking at the entire region. The other thing I would highlight is what I think is important is the timeliness. And it kind of ties back to the first question of quickness or ease of decisions. We have 43 tanks that we have to really quickly move through cease waste and then operational closure. You can't do that in a short period of time, which is what we've challenged our team to do, without the benefit of good relationships and leveraging those ideas from other areas.
Thank you, Wyatt. So we all know there's sometimes an appropriate tension between field sites and headquarters, balancing out the authority and the responsibilities. But here's a question I'll ask Kristen first, and then see if Wyatt or Kim or Laura have anything to add. But so how do you balance the roles of EM headquarters and the field sites in managing regulatory relationships? Because they are local, but you might have some best practices from an EM headquarters perspective. What roles can and should the contractor play in these relationships also?
I liked your metaphor at the beginning about being a polygamist marriage counselor, and I think that metaphor still applies to this discussion as well. So I think the benefit of how we think about this at headquarters in EM4 is that, my particular scope is the regulatory compliance, but also the intergovernmental stakeholder engagement, which also includes our advisory boards. And so it's a very short trip down the metaphorical hallway while we're working at home to get all of those entities involved. And the benefit of having more than 20 years of established formal relationships with 6 intergovernmental groups who represent the interests of all of our communities, local communities, tribal communities, but also the regulatory side with the National Governors Association, the National Association of Attorneys Generals, ECOS, which represents the environmental commissioners, and then State and Tribal Government Working Group. So you've got the whole universe right there together. And I know folks have probably heard talk of the combined intergovernmental meeting, which has been in place for about that same number of years. And I'd say the level of trust that we've built through those 6 groups with DOE has been really an important avenue to explore some of these agreements and these abilities to build trust and relationships and do the lessons learned and sharing and things of that nature. Additionally, we've come back to using the National Cleanup Dialogue Group again, which I know Mark Whitney was here earlier. This was one of his projects when he was heading the EM program back a few years ago now. And that was a convening of EPA leadership, both at the regional administrator level and also at headquarters, to kind of come together and talk holistically about nationwide themes and issues that were emerging. And that group did sunset for a little while, but we've reinvigorated it again, and this time adding a third group to it. So again, back to the polygamy metaphor, we have Environmental Council of the States represented as well. So we're able to bring that group together, again, with representatives from those three parts that come together at each of these sites, but then have a kind of nationwide discussion about identifying opportunities to tackle problems in new and novel ways. And again, with our sites sometimes being in the same region, that's even more opportunity to really explore things, thinking of the mission between Oak Ridge, Fort Smith, and Paducah, and being able to explore those lessons learned. So those are a couple examples of how we've tried to leverage those relationships, and I'm sure others up on the panel have some additional ones to add.
Thank you, Kristen. So how about Kim, and then Wyatt, and then Laura, if y'all have anything to add about that balance between headquarters and the field sites in the relationship building?
Our DOE customer, Michael Michelanis, has very strong ownership in improving the relationship with the regulator and strengthening it. And I know he works with headquarters on that closely. One way we support that in post-COVID, if we are post-COVID, is we've had a lot more requests for people to come out and tour our sites. And that's a great way to get the conversation going and people rallying around the work that's being done. And so we support the local field office in every opportunity we can to get those groups out to better understand what's going on.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kim. And Wyatt?
Yeah, so it's important for everybody to be successful in this exercise, whether it's local or in headquarters, right? And what I have found is the partnering initiatives, Mike Budney, Jim Falk, Edwin DeShong, being able to spend the time with them, make sure that we're aligned, and then over-communicate. And then I've watched them do the same through headquarters. That approach almost ensures a good alignment and success, right? Now, I'd like to think that there was never an opportunity where we didn't miscommunicate, but then I'd probably be misleading you. Recently, as part of even our negotiations with DHEC and EPA, lessons learned I got out of it was, as you bring in more people to the fold, as you negotiate with larger groups, you've got to make sure that the equivalent groups in the other organizations are equally informed. You don't want EPA's legal hearing it from DOE's legal instead of up their line. And to me, a focus on communication is the critical element that ensures you have that kind of success.
Thank you, Wyatt. Some key lessons there. That's excellent. And Laura?
So from a field perspective, I think that in particular a strong relationship, working relationship between EPA and DOE headquarters as sisters agency is really an important part of the process and a key piece of the puzzle, because we saw as we worked to resolve the dispute for the on-site disposal facility, how that interaction was effective in facilitating resolution of that dispute. So it would not have been possible to get to where we got if it wouldn't have been for the involvement and interaction that our headquarters had with EPA. So I think it's really important from a contractor perspective. I think the contractors bring the technical expertise, which brings credibility to the process. So having the contractor be on the table when we're working with the regulators, I think is helpful. It brings credibility to the process. It helps build the trust. And also it's important that, you know, the people responsible for the actual cleanup work are at the table to make sure that those decisions are take into consideration all aspects that need to be considered in making those decisions. So.
Excellent points. I agree. Thank you. So I'm going to jump to Amy. Just to hear again how the community voice gets woven into the cleanup decision-making process. But Amy, curious from you, what are the signs from a community perspective that the regulatory relationships are going south? And how is the community impacted when you see that, if you...
Wow. Well, what I want to do is just talk a little bit about listening to all the success with the relationship building that's occurred in the federal-state relationship. But the regulatory process is extraordinarily complex. And I guess the agreements, the CERCLA process, the federal facilities agreements, they're not really conducive, or they don't incentivize community involvement. And so you have to rely on building the relationships with the agencies to be able to do that. And kind of tagging on to what Laura has talked about a little bit on the on-site disposal cell. So we saw a timeline earlier this morning, starting back to 2010, moving forward. And so the timeline that each milestone in that timeline, the community had a milestone in that timeline as well. That, I was just taking a look at that, and we straddled 2 gubernatorial administrations, 3 presidential administrations, but 1 city administration. So we've had, continuity over that 12-year time span, and the city has been, very engaged in that process. We have probably submitted, dozens of volume of pages of questions and comments on the process dating back. I guess to answer your question, I think, in the federal facilities agreement and the oversight agreement, which has since changed, there is a process for dispute resolution. And so when we received correspondence that the state was first in informal dispute resolution and then formal dispute resolution, there's a process there. But what I will say is some of the things that I want to talk for just a moment about best practices that I think have really benefited the decisions that are being made. One of which, talking about transparency, going from a proposed, all the steps in the process, the documents that you have to develop, the investigations. The state developed a dedicated page on the proposed landfill, and every single document, every single letter related to that since 2010 is posted there. So if you have a new council member or you have a new county executive, I've referred a lot of people to that website, and you can really get the background and all the comments and the response comments, and that's been very beneficial. The other really important thing I think people need to remember is that local governments, our elected officials, our professional administrators, we are bound, to protect the health and safety of our communities, our citizens. And each side is different, but, Oak Ridge is somewhat unique in that the entire reservation is in our city limits. So we have a dynamic there that is a little different from some of the other sites because we are right there. We have a community of 31,000 people. So Seth mentioned earlier, the last point he wanted to make till we move on, he said, he made a remark this morning that, 30 years ago, ECA, the energy communities were allowed in the room, and I know that a lot of our communities, we still want to work to now, have a seat at the table. And so the processes that you have developed, those regulatory emerging issues team, and we've worked with, Kristen and the federal team for years, continuing to grow that and look at how can we build upon those relationships. And, the technical issues can be very complex, and we've been able to have technical support to help the community understand that. So I think those are some of the things that are really important from the community's perspective.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you, Amy. A lot of wisdom in the Senate. Thank you. So here's a question. I'll start with Laura and then go to Kim and then Wyatt. But it's a little bit unclear to me whether or not our structures are really built for a partnering approach in a sustained way. How do we build a team for regulatory sustained engagement that fuels the cleanup mission? And, we build it for compliance, right? We build structures to protect and ensure compliance. But how about a level up, for that sustained regulatory engagement in a collaborative manner? So how do we build the DOE and contractor structures really to incorporate that?
So I think, of course, these teams are built on trust and, having continuity on the membership of the teams to the extent possible, or at least some sort of a succession plan where you can get people ready when they start out, if you're going to replace any members so that they can start getting the exposure and the experience would be important. Also, making sure that the team members at all levels are empowered to come up with innovative decisions, that everybody gets to be listened to with an open mind, and that those decisions, are proposed and elevated when, agreement cannot be reached in a timely manner. So I think, those are key important things. I think DOE has to be the driver of this partnering process because we work with agencies that have, a lot of other scope other than our scope. So it's in our best interest to, drive the process and keep the focus so that we can continue to get whatever we need from the regulators to move forward. And, that includes, again, the commissioner, of the state of Tennessee, the administrator of EPA Region 4, making sure that we keep those open lines of communication and that we keep the relationship going and keep the momentum going.
Thank you, Laura. And again, I want to congratulate you on all the relationships that you've built, especially at those higher levels with the EPA region and, of course, the state and even up through headquarters. So that's great work. So Kim and Wyatt, who owns the relationship with the regulators aspect in y'all's organizations?
I'll go ahead and start. Well, DOE has a very strong lead in that relationship, plus DOE has the Fed-to-Fed interactions and tribal interactions, which sometimes come into play. I mean, as the contractor for DOE, I agree we have a seat at the table and we have a vested interest in the process, and I think we all want the same thing, including the regulator, and that's to do more cleanup, better, faster. It's the pathways of how to get that accomplished where sometimes we get the differing opinions. So we have a regulatory consent order process, which is the core process by which, here's the priorities for cleanup, here's how you go through the process. If you have a dispute, you go back to that foundational document. But really, a lot of the work gets done in the technical meetings, the working level meetings on how we go about those activities. When Ike White came out earlier this year to Los Alamos, he challenged Michael Michelinas and myself to, okay, let's get a strategic alignment, not just with the regulator, but with the community at large. I mean, I have a strategic plan for my company, but Ike challenged us to get that broader community buy-in. Since we used to be a part of the lab, I mean, we're separate now. We've been separate for over 4 years. Ike felt like that would be a good process for us to go through with our stakeholders and community. So we are embarking on that process right now. Longenecker is assisting us in that. So that's also a parallel path that we are taking besides our core regulatory issues. We're going about the strategic alignment process.
I mean, that's a beautiful, I love that. Thank you, Kim. Wyatt?
It's really clear. DOE is a signatory to the commitment, right? But it's our job to deliver on that. And as such, it really is, I love the way you said it. The benefit of having the contractor in those negotiations is we can actually explain the level of detail that we have to work through to deliver the objective. I don't know that structure, you asked that question earlier, I don't know that structure is our challenge as much as building a culture. And I liken this back to what we all invested in when we went through the safety conscious work environment, where we really wanted that understood and understood to the level that the next levels of management would carry it, i.e. you're building a succession plan. We want to go beyond just complying into a level of commitment. And it really takes everybody in that role, right? So while it's owned by DOE, I clearly have a responsibility in terms of delivery, and even to the point of, in our case, helping the negotiations with an understanding of what the risks are. Yeah.
Thank you, Wyatt. And like you said, building that culture, building that group dynamic safety and the practices for being collaborative and reaching alignment and mutual decisions. It's part of the culture that we see strongly at sites that have had that there that for a long time. So here's a question, and I'll ask it from a different perspective. Kristen and Connie first, and then everybody else adding in. What do y'all think? What are the signs that you might need a regulatory reset? So starting with Kristen.
I think in some ways it's a similar answer to what Amy laid out with, or there was someone made the reference to, maybe it was Connie, how many people are showing up at public meetings and things like that. Because I know the regulators are informed by their constituents in the states as well. And I think it's pretty clear to tell. Previously in my career, I had the honor of running the communications portfolio at EM headquarters. And the day we were #1 on Twitter was one that is very memorable. and for something that was not, I would say, something that the regulator was particularly concerned about, because it was a miscommunication about something that was not, in fact, an equivalent to Fukushima incident that happened at Hanford. It was, in fact, 18 inches of dirt moving a little bit. And so the regulators and the public and everyone, can't ignore moments like that, where we're the #1 item on Twitter. But that's not the norm, fortunately. And so I think, now as we're continuing to have so much progress and so much momentum and so many positive things to point to at the progress panel this morning, we didn't have enough chairs to fit everybody to talk through all of the projects that are happening. I happen to think that, we, at any time, the relationship could benefit from a reset. And maybe not a throw the whole baby out with the bathwater kind of conversation, but part of having trust in a relationship is being able to step back and say, should we be doing this differently? And always having a culture of continuous improvement and looking at things a new and fresh way. And I think that relates very nicely to, how we're striving in EM to build a more diverse workforce, because having the same approaches for 20 years, while we were able to tackle the easy things, the hard things are the ones that remain at this point. So having a new diverse approach to how we think about things, how we question things, how people with new eyes come in and look at an issue. So I think that a reset doesn't have to necessarily have a negative connotation, and that being creative and innovative should always be a trigger for how we approach the relationships.
That is an excellent point. Excellent point. So it's not a bad thing. It's always an up-leveling thing. Thank you. So we actually have 29 seconds left. So we'll end it there. Are there any last thoughts that any one of you all? Yes, Amy.
I wanted to address. I'm not sure a regulatory shift, but one of the things that you see in Oak Ridge, for example, with the Vision 2020 and the taking down the vision of reindustrialization, we're moving forward and working on developing a new airport and new nuclear facilities. And what happens is your DOE, TDEC, EPA relationships with dealing with the cleanup program, we are shifting. We have relationships with other divisions. You have to bring other divisions of DOE EPA and TDEC in to help us through that regulatory process. Because if we have a water discharge or a permit issue, for example, on the cleanup program, we've had technetium in our system, uranium, mercury. That's not the division of TDEC that deals with DOE. That is a different division. So I think the partners, as you look at moving forward, to complete our vision for the community, we need to look at, the community is involved in regulatory relationships also, and we need to make sure we're clearly communicating those and getting your assistance in building on the knowledge that you've gained to help us move forward.
I agree. Thank you, Amy. That is very valuable. So I just want to say that I know that across the complex, everybody's investing in some regulatory, in strengthening those regulatory relationships. I hear a lot about it. I really do appreciate that energy that you all are putting into strengthening and investing. And so, and again, I just want to give a huge hats off to the people on this panel, just because I've got a lot of personal experience and have seen up close and personal their commitment and their continuing investment, such a high priority that they put on the regulatory relationships being strong and healthy, and it's getting them progress. So thank you to the panel, and we'll have a round of applause. And